2 summers ago, I wrote a memoir about my experience at Brookwood camps in the 1970s. It was a great way to relive those moments. I thought it would be fun to hear other camp stories. So join me as we go back to the bunks. Attention boys camp, attention girls camp. Today is Brother and Sister Day. Dress for today is shorts and a light jacket. So congratulations, you're the first guest that I've actually seen within the last 4 decades.
I'm sure.
I truly don't know much about what I'm going to ask you today, so we'll just dive right in. I think people would assume I know the answers, but we never really discussed much of this. So I do know that your sleepaway camp career started at Camp Olympus.
Yes, I absolutely hated that camp.
What year was that? How old were you? How did you hear about it?
Well, I always went to a day camp, which I absolutely loved, Brooklyn Day Camp. And when I guess I outgrew it at age 12, there was a year or two where I don't know, I probably did some work. But then a lot of the kids on my block went to Camp Olympus in Parksville, New York. And I said, great, I'm athletic. I look forward to playing baseball and volleyball. So I get to camp and there was no structure. I was in a bunk. The girls were nice, but they were just lying around all day.
What year was this?
I think this was it was definitely 1969 because I remember that, was it 69?
Would it have been 70? Because we started Brookwood in 71.
No, I think it was 69 because wasn't that the year that Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon?
I do know it was the Mets, Jets. It was New York Sports and Knicks that year.
Okay, so I think it was I'm pretty sure it was 1969. And what was the year that there was Woodstock? Because
that was 69, yeah.
Okay.
And according to Perry, who I spoke with last week, that was a very rainy summer.
It was very rainy, but even if it wasn't raining, the girls would just worry about their makeup and their hair. And honestly, that wasn't my jam. So I was pretty unhappy. I was thinking of going home half the summer, but, I just figured I would stick it out. And I did meet some nice people, but I knew there was no way I was going back to that camp.
So you were about 14 then, right? So were you in like one of the oldest girls groups as a camper back then?
I think I think so. I was definitely in still a camper mode. It wasn't a CIT or might have been a senior girl or something like that, but it wasn't a well-run camp. I was very, it was just very loosey-goosey and not my thing.
Do you remember your counselor from Olympus?
No, I really don't.
And I knew of a few people from our block that went, Michael Levy and some of the others. Did you go with anybody that you knew?
There was one girl from Sheepshead Bay High School who was in my gym class. Her name was Shelley Wang. And the funny thing is that I came home and I told our parents, I said, oh, Shelley Wang is going to Camp Olympus. I'm really excited. She's athletic. She water skis. She does all this stuff. And then Dad said, Wang? Is her father's name Bernie and her mother Babe? And I said, I don't know. I'll ask. So, of course, there were no cell phones back then. So the next time I had Jim, I said, Shelley, is your dad Bernie and mom Babe? And she said, yeah, how do you know? I said, my dad grew up with them.
Amazing.
On Neck Road somewhere in Brooklyn. They were really nice people.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So then you took a summer off before we embarked on Brookwood in 71?
I must have. I think I might have worked I worked at one of the bagel stores on Nostrand Avenue. I worked at Guys with
Pies. Yep.
I even worked as a cashier at one of the grocery stores for a while. But, I cobbled together, I guess, my summer. And that was that.
So now we transitioned to Brookwood. It's 1971. I know you entered as a CIT in KK. I don't think in my 4+ years there I ever saw the inside of KK. So how would you describe that to somebody, like me at that time? So if I asked you in 1971, what is it like in there? What would you have said?
I loved it. I thought it was, idyllic. The downstairs, there was a big music room. I remember having good times in that music room because one of the campers, Robin Bloom, was great on the piano. And that's when the Carole King Tapestry album hit or dropped, whatever they say now. And, we just had some really fun time singing around the piano when, in between all of our activities because we were very busy. Upstairs, I went to camp with 3 of my friends from home. Gay Small, Lisa Goldstein, and Michelle Seidman. Gay and I had been to camp together for many, many years. Lisa and Michelle were like newbies, but, I'm digressing. Let's get back to KK. So the 4 of us, we were known as the Bay Girls from Brooklyn, the Sheepshead Bay Girls. And, we were, CITs. We were put on the floor. I think there were 2 other rooms on the floor. Our room did not have a bathroom because we were all new, so we didn't have the seniority. But one of the other rooms had our cousin Phyllis Swick and Ellen Rifkin, I remember, and Nina and Debbie Adele. I remember these girls so well. And then the other room had Robin Bloom, Eileen Foreman, Irene Shipman, and Laura. I forgot Laura's last name, but she also was a good musician. She was from New York City.
So, and that was not the year Marty Williams was up at camp as a dishwasher. Was another Sheepshead Bay legend basketball.
I think Marty Williams was there my first year as a counselor. But, I don't know if all the windows opened up onto the roof, but our room did. So people came into our room, we opened up the windows and we all sat on the roof. And back then everyone would bring breakfast cereals from, the mess hall, whatever it was called. And we would eat our Captain Crunch. And one day we wake up in the morning and we see a bat eating right outside our window, eating the cereal that was left there. So after that, we said no more food on the roof.
Funny. I think yeah. I remember you had the little Kodak picture book in your room at home, and I think there was a picture of you guys on the roof of KK. So I remember you guys sitting in front and a roof shot. Which counselor did you assist that first year?
Oh, God. That first year as a CIT, I think I had the middies, that group. I don't remember the particular counselor.
Do you remember the group leader, or the middies were what age?
Well, that year, I think they were 7, maybe 6 and 7, or 7 and 8. And I really don't remember the counselors when I was a CIT.
You remember all of KK, but you don't remember the counselor.
Right. I remember all of KK, but, that wasn't, the priority for us.
Of course.
I mean, it was fun, but it was work. And, but, the more fun things were with the group of gals that were the CITs. And there was another level they were called staff assistants, and they were a year older. And those were the ones who were seniors in high school. But the Bay girls, we were all seniors in high school. And I think Perry pulled a fast one on us because we could have been staff assistants, but the CITs, you had to pay more to be a CIT. And a staff assistant was a couple of $100 less for the summer.
Where did they live, the staff assistants?
Right above.
Oh,
so
in KK.
There were like two, there was the base floor, and then I guess it was the attic floor. And, it was, we all did things together. So.
And aside from the Bay girls that you went up with, who would you say is the first person you truly befriended outside of the inner circle? Like that first day, did you connect with somebody?
Yeah, I think it was probably Eileen Foreman and Robin Bloom, probably. Maybe Ellen Rifkin also.
Okay.
Yeah. Debbie Adele. They were all, it was a really nice crew.
Yeah, it sounds it. Then 1972, the following year, you become a counselor. So how old are you? You're about 17 going on 18 at that point?
I was actually just turning 17 because I graduated high school at 16. So I was 16 going on 17 when I was a counselor.
Which is bananas when you think
right,
back at it.
I know. I say, oh my God, I had such a big responsibility.
And how old were the girls that you had that first year?
Well, it's funny, when I worked as the CIT, I requested the same age group because I liked them. I thought, they were still young enough that they would listen to me and not, smart Alex. And the group apparently was split into rovers and middies, and I got the midi group, the older group of them. And it was a great bunk. I just love those girls.
And how prepared were you after being a CIT and now 16 going on 17? How prepared are you to spend a full summer taking care of basically, that bunk of girls?
I didn't really think about it. I just did it. I never really, you were 5 years younger than me, so it's not like I took care of you as a baby. I was sort of out of the house and on my own. So I really, I just did it. I just, thought that I would treat them, as kids and, with respect. And, I think it worked.
Apparently so, yeah.
Yeah, because, I don't remember all the girls in the bunk, but I remember many of them. And it was, I know you had one of the podcasts with Alan Zwillenberg, who was such a nice guy. His whole family is nice. Marcia Zwillenberg was one of my campers. And one thing I remember about her, she was a fabulous athlete. She was a great kid. And she always got care packages of Bacos. I don't know if you remember those.
Oh, of course I do, yeah.
Yeah, she would just, drop them like jelly beans. And I just thought that was really funny. But she had the nicest long hair. I would, brush it out in waves when they had a social. It was really fun. And then, and I know that I think you said you didn't remember her sister. I remember her sister well, Janet, who was one of the stable helpers. So she was always hanging out in the stables with the horses, but she was really, a nice person too. The other ones in my bunk were Amy Plutus, Lisa Solomon.
You had Swirsky.
Oh, Randy Swirsky and Donna Sirota. And I remember packages that Donna used to get. Her mother used to make her, all the girls in the bunk were always waiting for this package to come. They called it ambrosia. And it was, coconut and nuts and fruit, and it was delicious.
So all of you look forward to it.
Yeah, we all looked forward to it.
And who was the group leader for that first year for you when you were the counselor? Do you remember?
I don't remember her name. I remember what she looked like. She was what I call a one-hit wonder. She was just there that one season. And I think, I was thinking about this. There were a lot of one-hit wonders, who were, group leaders just for a year, and then you never
Right.
saw them again. But, at KK, when I was at KK, it was Marcia Burzak, and Steve Burzak was the girls' head counselor. And, he can be tough, but he was funny. And I do remember once when we were CITs, there was a raid. We had a raid, went down to the boys' bunks or the waiters' bunks. I can't remember which bunk. And they went berserk. Oh, my God. Steve Burzak came into our rooms, I think tossed all our mattresses over. And I'm like, really? I can't believe they're doing this. They called our parents, not that our parents really cared, because that's what camp is about. And anyway, I digressed.
No, that's I never knew that. I had never heard that before. That's incredible. Yeah. And I know when I spoke to Willie, he spoke a little bit about some bullying that he encountered as his first-time counselor, or homesick kids Perry, alluded to. Did you have anybody who was incredibly homesick, or was there any bullying? You don't have to name names per se, but did you deal with that?
No, as a first-time counselor. Oh, this is interesting, which you just reminded me. My co-counselor, I think Perry tried to pair up a new counselor with an older counselor. And my older counselor was Linda Rifkin, who was Ellen Rifkin's older sister. And she was the nicest person. I just loved her. But very early on in the season, like probably the first week of camp, I don't know if it was she was hit by a ball in the eye or in the head. I can't remember the injury, but she went home. So here I was, 16 going on 17, by myself with a bunk of, I think there were 9 kids in the bunk. Elizabeth, I forgot her last name. She was in the bunk too. But, there was a new girl. She wasn't in my bunk. She might have been in one of the other midi bunks, very homesick. And I know that the group leader, who was very kind, I remember her. I can picture her perfectly. I don't remember her name. She spent so much time with this one camper that, she was totally monopolized, but the girl ended up staying for the whole summer. So it was, credit to her.
Right, worked out.
Yeah.
And then the first place you discovered off the campgrounds, whether it's, the first night spot you discovered, and then the place you discovered to spend your days off. What were like the first experiences off the campgrounds? Because now you're a counselor. That's a big deal, getting to leave the grounds legally.
Yeah, right, legally. There was a bar that all the counselors went to. I want to say it was called Tony's, but I can be totally...
There's Tony's, and they serve pizza. Yeah, it was Tony's. I've never been, but Peter Cohn and I once left the golf course in search of Tony's. And I think I told this story when I wrote about it. and we were halfway down the road, and a stray dog came out of nowhere and just eyeballed us. And we freaked out and we just wouldn't move. And the dog was looking at us. We were looking at the dog. And it was, I want to say it was Flip Zuckerman, drove by in a truck and saw us on the road. And we said, maybe he'll think we're local kids and leave us alone. He pulls right up. He's like, what are you two clowns doing here?
Yeah, I think
So so we never made it to Tony's, but that was our destination.
Yeah. So that was, that was the night spot. I mean, a lot of times the counselors, I think, would just hang out at the canteen on campus. But I think on the weekend, people would go to Tony's because there was, I want to say there was a live band. I may be making that up, but there was music. It might have been a jukebox. And everyone danced, and it was really fun. It was really fun. But, the negative was a lot of these guys who had cars, that road leading to Tony's was it snaked.
Hawk's Nest.
Yeah, it was very scary. So that was, the negative of going there on a weekend. And then on days off, I guess, I had, our grandparents lived in,
Liberty.
In Liberty. And many times I would, I'm trying to remember, sometimes I would go visit them. They would, take us to dinner. I would bring a friend, or, I don't know if that year I had a boyfriend, Paul Wiener from Sheepshead Bay. He was my summer boyfriend. We didn't date during the year, but he was my summer boyfriend, and he always got a car, and it was fun. We would, travel around, go to Monticello, go to Liberty, see Sadie and Izzy, and they would feed us and, do laundry in between.
Right. And then when I spoke with Perry, he said that he would stay up till 2 a.m. sometimes to ensure people, weren't violating curfew and weren't coming back inebriated. Do you ever remember being out and thinking like, you better get it together before we go back into camp? For anybody? No, not for you personally. And you don't have to name names, but anybody where you're like, you better straighten up quickly.
Right. Yes. So I do remember some, I mean, there was alcohol and, there were drugs. It was, the early 70s. So.
And you guys are between 17 and 20 years old on average. Right. So, and it's 69. So, the 70, 71, 72. So, makes sense. And then did you ever know anyone, or did you get into trouble with Perry? Were there any stunts pulled that could have gotten any of you in trouble?
Well, I was always the good counselor, but I do remember that I can't remember if it was my first year as a counselor or my second year as a counselor, but the counselors had a strike, and I'm not really sure what the genesis of the issue, the problem was, but I think, they were issuing orders that we had to stand when we were at an activity. We weren't allowed to sit, which was so friggin' annoying. So it might have been that. It might have been, the night duty on the bunks, which everyone hated because it was cold. They didn't let us go inside. If you nodded off a little bit, they would make you, you would lose, you would get another duty on call. So it might have been a host of things, but.
So who was the Norma Ray that organized this really good cause?
I think it was my friend Gay who organized it. And
way to throw her under the bus.
Strike. But, what we did was, we got it was at, I guess it was at rest period after lunch. And we had organized it so that we got all the CITs and KK and the staff assistants to cover every single bunk while we marched into Perry's office. And it was the entire girls' camp. Every bunk was covered. We weren't we weren't cavalier about it. And I remember some of the CITs with Dory Summer, Debbie Mass, Lisa Gampel. We all marched into Perry's office. He totally flipped. We were afraid of Perry when he was calm. So he raised his voice. You could have heard him in the Bronx. And he said, "What the hell is going on?" And in a very calm voice, because Gay was going to be the speaker. I definitely didn't volunteer for that job. She said, "Well, Perry, in a very calm voice, we have these complaints. You get back to your," just screaming. I don't even know if he remembered, but yeah, that was not fun. It was fun because it was organized but I don't know if there were any negative ramifications from that, but I know that Gay didn't come back after that summer.
Nobody's seen her since.
She said, I don't know if Perry offered her a job. I guess it was our second year as counselors. Yeah.
So, and what was the cause? Did you guys reach your goals? Was anything changed as a result?
Probably not. It's not like we were making, thousands of dollars. I think, the second summer as a counselor, maybe you made $200. It was, anyway.
Great, good stuff. So I know when I spoke to Willie, he was a two-time Color War general, as were you. So do you remember the team names of the two teams that you had? And then how many years apart? And did you win?
Okay, well, first of all, I was always on the blue team while I was at Camp Brookwood. Never won a color war. Never, ever, ever. But I still loved every minute of it. I remember that walking to the mail room right by Perry's office, and Artie Datz, who was, I don't know if you remember him.
Looked like Mark Spitz, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
He's such a nice guy. He was I guess he was one of the athletic directors on girls' camp. And he, they say you get tapped for general. Well, he actually tapped me on the shoulder and I'm like, "Oh, hi, Artie." He goes, "Rhonda, we want you to be a general." And here I am, a little pisher. I'm like, "Really? Me?"
Was this your first year? This was 72?
Yes, it was my first year as a counselor. Right. Yeah. So he said, where the married married staff's
bungalows, the
bungalows right. are? I said, "Yeah, I always hang out with Sue Futterman and Jane Kamen, some rest periods." He said, "Just keep walking there and all the generals are going to meet and pick teams and blah, blah, blah." So it was really fun. I mean, the teen counselor on my team who they chose, I think she was a one-hit wonder too. Her name was Leslie. She was really a nice woman. And we got along well. And our team, I remember this team. I don't remember the subsequent team. This team was the Blue Visigoths. And it was great because you like horse trade. And I think on the other side, it was Corey Sue Diamond was a general on the red team. And I don't remember who her cohort was. But, you sit around and you make your teams. And of course, I picked all my friends. And what was interesting was that it just worked out this way, that all the counselors that I chose all played the guitar. So when we had the alma mater,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably one of the most famous alma maters at Camp Brookwood. Come take my hand, let us walk through the field. I have a terrible voice, so I'm not going to sing it.
Thank you.
The counselors all got together. They learned the song, and it was really beautiful. It really was.
And what the second time you around, how many years apart was it? So that's 72. What was the next time? Because you were there through 74, correct? You didn't go back in 75.
I
think you were there 4 years, the same 4 years I was there. I tried a fifth and unsuccessfully.
Yeah, my first year as a counselor, I was a losing general, but we had a great team. And then the year in between, I was a counselor of the same MIDI girls, but they were now inters. So that was great. I think the parents felt very comfortable with me.
Sure.
And vice versa. And I was the lead counselor then. And I had an English girl as my co-counselor, who I remember her. She was Victoria. She had a great accent. I think she worked down at the waterfront. And she used to sneak out of camp because she had a boyfriend. She took a boat across to Laconda. She had a boyfriend at Laconda. She would come in at like 5 a.m. and there you go. But anyway, so the second year that I was a counselor, after you're a general, they make you a wise woman if you want. So I have to say I was a wise woman that second summer, but the second year I was a counselor, but it wasn't as much fun. You were hanging on the edges. You were, taking points off for, when you spoke in the
dining room.
The dining room. But then I wasn't going to come back to camp after that year because, I wasn't a teacher. I was still in college, and I was getting ready to transfer to a nursing program. And so I did my 2 years of college, and I still needed one chemistry class with a lab. So that summer I was in lab and in class, and then I get a call from Perry. I guess 3 weeks into the camp season. And he said, would you be interested in coming up to camp? And I really hadn't thought about it. I said, well, I have some finals. I have, labs to do, and I'll be done probably, in another week. But yeah, and I have this boyfriend who, I'm hanging out with. He said, all right, both of you come up. I'll get him a job. He'll have a job too. So we came up to camp, and
I do remember that I was in Varsity Hall, and that's when Major came into my bunk. Yeah.
So we got to camp, and I was told that I was going to have my girls, the same crew, who were now seniors on girls' camp, but there was like a switcheroo on me, like a bait and switch, which I was not happy with. And he called me in. He said, look, we need to put you in, I don't know if it was the middies or the rovers, because I'm having, I don't think the group leader was that strong. And the person who was supposed to be backing her up they weren't that happy with her. So he said, so you're it. And I'm like, okay. So I ended up that summer. It turned out fine. So I was there probably for five weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that. Now that you mention it, yeah.
Yeah. And then I just thought I'd be a wise woman again. And then it was, I think, Coral Shantz was the athletic director. And he grabbed a hold of me and said, we want you to be general again. And I'm like, really? So I said, okay, I knew the drill. I can't remember where we powwowed, but I don't remember the name of the team, but it was a blue team.
And red won again.
And red won again. I said, you want me to be, I said, only if I can be blue because I don't have any red t-shirts. So.
Good reason.
Yeah.
And if you didn't go to Brookwood, which camp do you think you would have liked to have experienced?
Well, it's funny because my kids, I have 2 boys, and when I was looking at camps for them, Brookwood was still in existence, and it was being run by
the Fiedlers?
The Fiedlers, Ken Fiedler. And I remember getting a call from, I guess someone heard that I had, my older son, I was ready to send him to camp. I guess he was a 3rd grader. And I got a call from Dory Summer and I think Corey Sue Diamond too. They were working at the camp with Ken Fiedler. They go, oh, it's a grade. You got to let send your son here. And then Ken Fiedler either called me or came to my house in Larchmont. I really didn't want him to come because I knew I wasn't going to be sending my son to Brookwood. But he said, oh, we have this great basketball program. I said, stop right there. I said, I'm an ice hockey mom. My kids are not very tall. They don't play basketball. That's not their sport. And, that was one thing that I didn't like about Brookwood, that, a lot of the nights were spent watching basketball games. And, I just felt I wanted my kids to go to a camp where they had their own activities at night. They just weren't hanging. So I ended up sending them, both of my boys eventually went to Indian Head Camp in Pennsylvania, which coincidentally is right down the road from the camp that Richie Kamen bought, Equinunk. And it was such a well-run camp. It was a lot like Brookwood, but more nurturing. It was a little more crunchy granola than Brookwood, but it was 0 tolerance policy for drugs for counselors, 0 tolerance for any nonsense. And what was interesting about Indian Head was that on the first visiting day, you schlep up with all your, wanted sushi and X, Y, and Z. And then who do I run into? Howie Rotto, Stephen Schmutter, and Donna Levine. They all sent their kids to Indian Head.
And you had no idea ahead of...
I had no idea. So, and it's funny because over the years, I actually, when I was still in college, I stayed with Stephen Schmutter at Harper College, which is now Binghamton, but it was Harper back then. And they had a nursing program, and I was interviewing at different nursing programs to see, which one I would get into, where I would go. And I stayed with him in his dorm room, and he was a great host. It was really fun. So we kept in touch on and off, but then, he got married, had kids, same with me. And then Howie Rotto, when I was, I'm trying to think of the year now. I think it was 1978. I don't know if you know this, but Jimmy Carter's mother, the president, our former president, Jimmy Carter, may he rest in peace. His mother, Ms. Lillian, was a nurse, and he earmarked money to train master's prepared nurses around the country. So certain schools had these master's programs they didn't call them nurse practitioners then, clinical nurse specialists. So I was applying to be a clinical nurse specialist in pediatrics and child health. So And one of the programs was located at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Someone told me that Howie Rotto was at Duke, which is right near the triangle there, Raleigh and Durham. So I called Howie Rotto and I said, I'm coming down. I have an interview. Can you put me up for a night? So again, my good buddies from Camp Brookwood put me up and I had the interview. Back then, I know it's probably more built up now, but this is in, the late 70s. I went for the interview and there was like nothing there. There was like, because Howie said, oh, you want to go to a basketball game? I said, not really. He goes, well, there's nothing else to do. So I went. But when I went for the interview, she said, oh, I see you're from New York City. Do you think you can, acclimate to the environment here? And I looked right at her and I said, I don't think so. So obviously I didn't end up.
Right.
Yeah. But I did end up at Emory University in Atlanta and reconnected with Cliff Mass at that point because he had just finished law school. And it was great because he had a whole slew of friends from the New York, New Jersey area. So I had built-in friends immediately when I was down in Atlanta. And, over the years, I stayed with Cliff, and then when he finally came back to New York, I have to say, I got him his first job as a lawyer. He was, everyone talked about what a great athlete was. He was a really smart guy. He went to Penn, majored in some science, probably biology, if I recall. And I said, why don't you just go into, patent law? So through my connections, I got him an interview at this patent law firm and he got the job. And then he said, now I need an apartment. I said, okay, I'll put my feelers out. So I was teaching at that time at Skidmore College and they had a nursing department in Manhattan. And one of the nursing professors said, oh, I have a friend who has a great apartment on the Upper West Side. She's barely there. She would love to have someone in her apartment. Call Cliff. He said, sounds great. So I got him a job. I got him an apartment. The only thing I didn't get him was his wife. So we laughed about it years later when I saw him at that big reunion that I think Myron and a couple of other people organized. So
yes, I got to shout out. Cliff Mass has been the one person mentioned, I think, on all three podcasts thus far, usually singled out for his athletic prowess. So if he's listening, he was also, little known fact, his favorite candy, jelly rings. That's a fact. So remember that from 1973. So wrapping it up, the two questions that I asked of everybody thus far. If you could relive any one day because you wished you had done something differently, or it was such a great day that you would just love to live it again, what would that be? At Brookwood, of course.
Right. Probably one of the last days of saying, I just thought that was like the culmination of the summer. That first summer when when I was a general, that was really special.
When you do the alma mater, you're talking about that? Okay.
The alma mater and when we're all at the sing. You hear the boys' side, the girls' side, you see the posters. Right. It's like, it's the end of the summer. It's emotional because, you're not going to see a lot of these people until next summer or ever, you just don't know. I mean, I know there's a cohort that meets regularly, but I'm not a social media person. I'm, I sort of, did my own thing. But
all right, that's a good one. And then in the Brookwood movie, who plays you in those days as Counselor Rhonda Yacker?
Oh, definitely Meryl Streep.
No, but now from an age standpoint, that won't match because she can't. So I believe she's older than you.
Not that, I don't think that much,
So you'd have to,
you know.
looking at somebody who would fit in, probably a younger actress. Like if the Brookwood movie were released more recently, who can go,
Uh-huh.
who could actually get away with playing that?
Uh,
I think of two.
who?
I've got Reese Witherspoon
It's funny. I was thinking of her too,
or
but I thought she would be too old.
and then on the younger side, and I was thinking the same, if she's potentially aged out, in Sydney Sweeney.
I don't know who that is.
Okay. She's
I'm
like
showing my age.
she's like an it girl of the moment in movies right now. So
I'm showing my age.
she's big. So all right, I think that we've covered a lot of good ground. I've actually learned quite a bit more than I ever knew about your
Really?
camp years. Yeah, I mean, that's all new to me, most of that. So thank you for that. And don't forget to bring Mom her list of groceries.
Always.
and and thank you. And I'm sure people will really enjoy this one. So appreciate the
Good.
time.
I hope so.
All right. I'll speak to you later.